Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Alexander Carson, a filmmaker whose first feature, Brazen Age, arrives on iTunes today in most of the world. It's a strong debut from a compelling cinematic voice, kind of a mumblecore version of a Terence Malick movie, but in the best possible way, and you should definitely check it out when you get a chance. Sandy chose Distant Voices, Still Lives, Terence Davies' autobiographical 1988 drama about a Liverpool family coping with abuse, regret, and grief in the years after and during World War II. Impressionistic and somber, it was Davies' first feature after a series of shorter pieces, including the 3 films collected as the Terence Davies trilogy, and it announced him as a unique and potent filmmaker. It also gave Pete Postlethwaite a breakout role as the family's monstrous patriarch. Weaving music and emotion together in unexpected and moving ways, it's a proper work of art. And though it's hard to find on this side of the pond these days, those of us who've seen it will never forget it. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Distant Voices, Still Lives was one of those films that I saw in film school on a Laserdisc, if memory serves, for the first time. And it just, kind of blew my mind. I had no idea that a movie could be like that.
Right.
You know, that sort of like formally... in some ways formally experimental with the use of portraiture and the pacing and the emphasis on music that's very untraditional in terms of a narrative film, and it just completely blew me away. And I never saw it again actually until it came. There was a Terence Davies retrospective at the old Cinematheque at the AGO.
Oh yeah.
Maybe like 8 years ago or something like this, and they had 35mm prints, and they'd struck a new 35mm print for that, and I saw it again. I was wondering if it would have the same effect on me, and it totally did. It just it's just so special. And I brought like 8 people because I'd obviously hyped it up and said, I saw this movie back in the day, and it's really great. And at that time you couldn't get it anyway. Like it wasn't on iTunes, and there was a PAL DVD, but no one had access to that sort of equipment to play a DVD. At that point, I'm sort of talking about like the middle 2000s.
Right, yeah.
And so when I found out that it was coming to Toronto on 35mm, I dragged out a whole bunch of people, and then, the movie just killed me. It was fantastic to see it on celluloid. And then afterwards, all the people that I brought there were like, it was all right. I was devastated. I thought maybe but then again, I guess it's one of those films that's not for everyone. It's just kind of a special thing. It really touched me at a certain point in my life and showed me that there were possibilities that I'd never imagined, I guess, for filmmaking.
Yeah, and Davies is such a unique talent in that he makes movies that I don't fully... Yeah, I've been trying to frame this. I've been trying to figure out how to approach it, even to explain it to people who haven't seen his films, because they are all really specific, and he works in an especially textured sort of... It's not mannered, but he makes room tone and air factors in his storytelling. He makes you feel the environments that the characters are in. And in Distant Voices, Still Lives, which was the first of his films, and really... It was kind of unprecedented. He established this fully formed aesthetic that no one else was even attempting. And this is at a time when British cinema was Mike Leigh and Ken Loach and sort of these kitchen sinky verite, ugly films. Yeah. Stories about people being or gangster culture that was also happening then.
Totally, but also filmmakers like Alan Clark, like Elephant, or what's. Anyway,
and Scum.
These very political, very very tense movies.
Mm-hmm. And they were all concerned with the present. They were all just sort of immediately involved with whatever was going on. Or things like With and I that were set in the past, but sort of commenting on on the failure of the impending failure of England culturally, or whatever was going to happen next before Thatcherism. So it was either still dealing with Thatcher or it was prefacing Thatcher, but it was all of the moment somehow.
Right.
And any cinematic wave that was going on hadn't really hit yet. Neil Jordan was still making things like Angel and Danny Boy, and Angel is Danny Boy. They're the same film. I do that every time.
what was he doing? He'd done Angel, I guess.
Yeah,
and
he was working on things like The Company of Wolves, maybe. Or was that 84? But there was no...
It was all sort of political allegory.
Yeah. There was no... the period stuff that was happening wasn't anything like this. There had never been an investigation of period like this before, I don't think. Like a burrowing kind of emotional quality to the story.
Not in like an art cinema context that I know of, at least during that period in British filmmaking.
Yeah. And then when he did it, everybody tried, and it still didn't work. Like, the thing he does is the thing that apparently only he can do.
Yeah, it just really like marches along at its own pace, and I liked your mention of the silence. Like it's full of music. The film really is full of all these great period songs from the 40s and 50s and earlier, I guess. But it's so quiet sometimes. Like the little bits of voiceover that come in from the various characters and perspectives. A line will come in. So why'd you marry him, Mum? Mm-hmm. Pause. Yeah. Because he was a good dancer. Pause. But it's very sort of split up in the way that maybe that like Malick does as well a little bit, but it even feels more. It just creates so much more space to sort of allow the audience to sit with the images, or to sort of position themselves, and the film really doesn't feel like it's trying to do the work for you. It's putting it, and that's why I think of it as being so much more like visual art in some ways, or it asks a lot of the viewer, and that's always something that I'm looking for in a movie.
Yeah, I remember seeing it and thinking just how little room he gives you to move. Like, you have to sit and watch these people. You have to focus on them. If you get distracted, if you wander off, if you can't, you have to scrutinize everything. You have to see what's happening, because no one will say anything. No one will actually articulate what's going on. Okay. He's made the cinema of repression, I guess, in a way that somehow manages to still be compassionate for the people who can't change themselves, can't do anything, can't move forward, won't move forward. I mean, I think of something like The Deep Blue Sea, where you're just steeped in trauma and sadness, to the point where the gas heaters are a character, because they start to feel oppressive, and they start to feel close in the frame, and you just can't. All of his movies make me very, very tense, because people seem to suffer in real time, but it's still beautiful. It's still swooningly beautiful.
I hear what you're saying about the suffering. I mean, it is. I remember the film always being like so gorgeous and so beautiful, and I sort of forget about how harsh, some of the relationships are, and some of the suffering is that the characters endure. But then when I go back to it, I'm like, oh right, this is actually a pretty dark story. Yeah. But it's sort of told with this elegiac sort of elegance, and like the space that you were talking about. I find that also sort of permits a bit of a daydreaming sort of quality, where if you don't want to get locked into the story, if you don't sort of want to be oppressed or somehow beaten down by the grimness of the conditions in which some of these people live, and then you can lose the thread a little bit, and you can sort of move in and out. I mean, there is no plot really, right? Yeah. I mean, that's the blessed relief, I guess, is that it doesn't feel. Maybe that's why it doesn't feel so sinister to me when I think back on it, is because the Pete Postlethwaite character is obviously very mean and very nasty, and has made the whole family's life quite difficult with his aggression. But because it's not a driving narrative in the same way, it's sort of these fragments of memory, then it permits a certain amount of freedom, I feel, for me, in a way, to sort of, maybe that's me protecting myself, Yeah. I mean, in a way, not wanting to fully engage with it. But it's true, I was going back and looking at some clips from the movie before we had this talk, and almost all of the really nice, sort of quiet, beautiful moments between some characters, it'll then, cut into something, where Pete Postlethwaite is striking his wife and beating her and throwing her down on the stairs.
Yeah.
And it's funny, maybe I'm revealing too much about myself right now. Maybe there's a reason that I blocked that stuff out. But that's never the stuff that sticks with me. And yet when I go back to the film, I'm really struck by how powerful it is. And I was talking with my girlfriend about the movie because we watched it together maybe 6 months ago. And she said, "Oh God, like that's such a powerful, effective, and really like harsh film." Mm-hmm. And I was like, is it? I don't know. It's funny. It goes to show you the different things that people focus on. But then, looking back at those clips, for sure. I mean, that's real. Like the stuff that it's obviously a very autobiographical film for Terence Davies, and because I think his dad died when he was quite young. I think his dad was also kind of a nasty dude, and I think that the way that he's working through some of that baggage that he carries around is to sort of align the point of view of the film mostly with the daughters of the two sisters.
I think so.
The son as well, but I'd say it's mostly kind of seen through a kind of feminist perspective. And as a queer filmmaker, I think that's his point of access into this film, into the way that he wants to introduce the audience to the world is through this sort of the perspective of these two sisters and dealing with this very like this kind of
their sort of limited perspective.
There's limited perspective and just how subjugated they are in this. At the time, we're talking about Liverpool in the 40s and 50s.
Well, sure, as
male-dominated
as
society,
women in
right?
post-war England, they're not going to have much of a role, if anything at all. So they're the son may be bullied and cowed, but that he still has more. He can leave. He can simply leave. Right.
He goes off and he goes to the army and he kind of gets a job. He does his own thing. Whereas the women, they marry and they succumb to the oppression of these men that they marry, who kind of seem okay at first, and then that fairly quickly, I guess,
is revealed to be
a problematic domestic situation, much like the ones that they grew up in, right?
Yeah.
So
he's working in a kind of a Douglas Sirk milieu, but it's so precise and specific that it never feels like melodrama to me. It feels stylized, but not. With melodrama, there's this exaggeration of everything. It can border on pantomime sometimes to just show how much is happening. The feelings are. It's almost like a musical where you burst into song, except that the movie does it for you. It swells in a way, and what Davis does is just not do that, and just leave people in their spaces, in their little rooms and little boxes, just trapped and not unable to escape. But yeah, he shows us how people find peace in their small spaces. So even though they don't escape a situation, they make the best of it, which is so uniquely British.
It does seem that way. Yeah. What's your take on the style of performance? Because you're sort of touching on that. You don't think it's melodrama. I don't think it's melodrama either. But where does it sort of land for you?
I think it's almost Brechtian's probably the wrong word, but it's close, right? It's some kind of precision that's it allows itself to be theatrical in a cinematic context. What Postlethwaite is doing is terrifying, but if you took him out of the film and put him somewhere else, everybody's on the same note. I don't know that it would work if one of them wasn't on board. If there was any hint of contemporary mannerism or self-awareness, these are all people who have not. I guess what it is I don't know. I'm flailing for the term. It's people who don't understand themselves. No one knows why anything's happening. That's the thing that always amazes me about Davis, is that he can telegraph that kind of confusion in characters. Nobody knows what their buttons are. Even in Sunset Song, there's a character who comes back from the war. He goes off to World War I and comes back completely traumatized and incapable of articulating. He flies into rage and sits and just stews in his own anger and doesn't understand that it's because of the war, because they don't have a language for it. You just, you stiff up your way through it. You're not supposed to be upset. You just explode. And that same thing is at work in Distant Voices, I think. It's people who don't understand themselves well enough to know how to express themselves or how to communicate with each other. It's just this inarticulate anger that's free-floating. It's almost passed from person to person.
Mm-hmm.
And so the acting style, it's just the tiniest bit self-aware from the performer's perspective, but not from the characters, if that makes any sense.
Right.
They're playing a note that they can hear.
It's definitely hearkening towards the performance style of the era that Davies obviously really admires.
Mm-hmm. But without
the
being...
old Hollywood thing.
Yeah,
right?
but without being that clipped fake thing.
No.
Which we all recognize.
Yeah.
I've interviewed him a couple of times recently, and he,
really?
And he says that it's the way he remembers things.
Uh-huh.
That's how he described the Deep Blue Sea, and that's how he described a couple of the domestic scenes in Sunset Song, where he was imagining it because he wasn't alive for that. But because I had said, you move around in time, but he's never made a contemporary film. I don't think he has any interest in that. He came a little bit closer with the Neon Bible, maybe, but he has no interest in the present day. And with his dramatic approach on the Deep Blue Sea was he remembers that the way it is. I think is more or less what he said. It's what interests him about, I'm going to get this wrong. What interested him about the period is that he's familiar with it. He knows every brick. He knows every floorboard. And the people in there are acting the way he remembers people acting. Which might explain why it's so precise. I mean, if he's actively directing everyone
right
to hit this certain tone. But it doesn't feel like it's a tone that exists anywhere else.
I think that the use of framing maybe also draws out a little bit of a theatrical quality that maybe wouldn't be otherwise, that wouldn't appear visible maybe if the scenes were covered in a different way. Maybe. Yeah. That's also because I'm just thinking about Deep Blue Sea, for example. I remember that film having amazing acting as well, but it being a little bit feeling slightly less theatrical to me, and I wonder whether that had to do with the visual approach being a little bit less contrived is the wrong word.
Ostentatious, maybe?
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. He'll frame up these scenes where it really looks like a still life. It looks like a family portrait, or it looks like it looks like a painting.
Yeah, it's very formally composed. He sort of plays with it a little bit in A Quiet Passion, in his new film about Emily Dickinson as well, just where the use of the frame to trap people, to freeze people, is a recurring image.
I haven't seen this. Is it good?
It's good, but I'm one of a handful of detractors. I think it just, after Sunset Song, it felt like a kind of a retreat into, it's almost as though he swung a little bit wide with his last film. I really liked Sunset Song. I think it's this great big giant movie about people and emotions framed in this huge sort of David Lean Ryan's Daughter epic framing. But with Quiet Passion, he came back and maybe overcorrected a little bit too much to the kind of film he used to make, like The House of Mirth, where people are stuck in tiny spaces with tiny with a handful of choices that none of which are any good. And not
unlike Distant Voices, maybe in some ways.
Yeah. Right. I mean, that is his theme, right?
Yeah.
Almost always, it's always going to be that sense of being trapped in your own life. But with A Quiet Passion, the film itself feels stiff and restricted, as opposed to commenting on stiffness and restriction. Mm-hmm. And it just didn't quite land for me.
Do you think that maybe he just made too many exceptionally interesting choices on Distant Voices, where then, because I feel like his visual style has been constantly pared back since then. I mean, that film for me really stands out above Neon Bible, Long Day Closes, all these. I mean, these are Deep Blue Sea. These are great films as well. But I just feel like he did so many exceptional and daring things that maybe he was cautious of wanting to sort of caricature his own style, or you don't repeat the same tricks.
You don't want it to become a tick, right?
Yeah.
But I think also with that film, he's shooting the moon. Like he's got his one chance to make a movie, so he does literally everything he can to make sure it's his movie.
Yeah.
And so it does have an abundance of Davis-isms. Not that they're bad. They're kind of overwhelming in a good way, because if you see the film in the dark, locked in a room with it, it will overwhelm you or drive you insane. A couple of people at the time just hated it because it was so slow. That was the argument. It's slow, and nothing happens. I was like, well, neither of those things is true. But if you don't key into it, I suppose it could feel that way.
I think that, it feels slow in this way that I find very beguiling and very compelling. And maybe just around the time when I might be getting bored of that sort of pacing, the film kind of gets really funny also. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like once you start to understand where everybody's coming from, you can pick it up.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the comedy is sort of introduced kind of slowly, but there are these, the whole film is just a series of vignettes, right? Like there's not any, as I mentioned, there's not any consistent overarching narrative. But some of these little vignettes, some of the characters between the sisters and their friends, or I'm thinking of the one when they're on the beach and they're in the tent, and anyway, there's just these little moments, and you sort of, it kind of catches you off guard, and you think, oh, I had no idea that I had permission to laugh, basically, or and then once you start to go down that track, then I find the second half of the film to be sort of replete with really chock full of these adorable and charming and funny and surprising moments of comedy that just bring a lot of levity to what might otherwise be a fairly dour
it's a more demanding experience without them.
Exactly. I mean, I think it that's what totally raises the film above any complaint about the pacing or the sort of I don't know. That's interesting that people find it slow. I don't.
Yeah, I never have either. I mean, they're very deliberate. They're absolutely meticulously structured. Even a film about vignettes, it has an ebb and a flow, and it has rhythms that let you sort of drift pleasantly through it, I suppose.
Yeah.
As opposed to something like, The House of Mirth, which has a very specific plot that has to be maintained and what's the term? Almost curated in its storytelling, where you have to get from beat to beat to beat, showing these minute changes on Gillian Anderson's face, it's an incredible performance, but if you glance at it, you don't see it. It's the sort of thing that is meticulously organized scene for scene for scene, and Distant Voices is that on a larger scale. Everything in it is exactly where it needs to be in every shot, and it does. I suppose you could say it risks feeling over-directed just because it is so insistent on its own imagery. Yeah. It's a film that is made to be beheld.
Yeah.
As opposed to just casually thrown on a screen.
Yeah, no, the choices are pretty distinct.
Yeah.
I mean, and it gets to that though right away. I mean, I'm thinking of that first push in on the family when they're all sort of standing in this very composed way, and you can tell it feels like they're posing for a photograph, even though I don't think they actually are, or maybe they are, because I think that maybe someone's getting married. I don't remember exactly what's happening there, but that we're not made to think that our point of view in that particular moment is the surrogate for, say, a camera or anything. Right, it's just that's the perspective. That's the perspective of the cinematic narrator, and that just I saw that and I was like, oh my goodness, this is something special. And I guess some people, it's going to rub them the wrong way. People who like neo-realist stuff and don't like a lot of formal choices, but I guess I'm just a sucker for any sort of strong choice that's committed to and then carried through on. So,
and I think it's also more of an oddity for having emerged in the 80s when everything was glossy and starting to speed up and everything was very intense. Even Mike Leigh, Ken Loach, or something like Jordan's Mona Lisa, where people are shouting at each other a lot, just with a level of intensity that the camera's in everybody's face, and the cutting is very brutal and immediate, and everything is real. And for a filmmaker to say, I prefer this. Derek Jarman was working at the same time, and he was just exploding onto the screen. And everything was super saturated and hyper intense, or austere and black and white and removed. But there was no place for what Davis was doing,
right.
or until he carved it out, until he established it and
right.
said, "This is the thing. This is the thing that I do, and the only thing that I do, and I do it, and I do it because I have to." And then after a moment, you realize, and he also does it better than anyone else.
Yeah, that's a really great point about some of these other films.
Why, thank you.
I mean, it was cinema at the time was totally was very charged, and Derek Jarman, I didn't even think about that, but of course that's so different, right? I mean, that's just,
and they were rising up almost in tandem.
Yeah.
Certainly their circles would have been the same. They would have known everyone together, or everyone together would have known them.
Yeah, and then Davies is doing like this very elegant, nostalgic, or just
attenuated cinema.
Yeah,
really precise.
Yeah,
and Jarman's doing The Last of England and just exploding Tilda Swinton left and right.
Totally. That's
perhaps a misstatement. What's a misappropriation? I don't mean to sound like I'm dismissing Jarman. I think what he did was phenomenal, but it was also extremely kind of a high wire act that was always telling you just how artistic it was, just how spectacular. It was about spectacle. It was about overwhelming you with things, or with something like Blue, which is just this beautiful, brilliant monologue kind of experience. It's not a monologue, it's a soundscape sort of experience. You are still very much aware that you are watching precisely what he wants you to see, but in a showier fashion than Davis. Davis just, with his movies, I get the sense that they're shot that way and staged that way because he can't conceive of doing anything else. Not that he's trying to impress us, just that this is what he has to do.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's true. I mean, all of the content in the film is extraordinarily ordinary, right? I mean, except for, Pete Postlethwaite beating his wife. I mean, maybe that's ordinary too, but in a harrowing, awful way.
You get the sense that it's not spectacular. It just happens.
It's just, it's them having an argument about whether, the daughter asking, fighting with him about whether she can go to the dance, or them smoking cigarettes outside and him yelling at the girls to, put out their butts and come in and go to bed. It's just, it's very ordinary. Or going to the pub and, we're sitting around at a family birthday party and everyone's sort of singing songs and
it's a mundane narrative.
It's an extremely
mundane world.
The milieu of it, at least, is I mean, apart from, there are some striking moments. I'm thinking now of when the bombs are dropped, and they have to run into. They all run underground to take shelter, and the Postlethwaite character, grabs his daughter rather forcefully and demands that she sing. And she starts up a song, and then everyone who's sort of hunkering down, seeking shelter from these bombs that are plummeting on their home, and just the sense of community anyway, it is sort of punctuated by these small moments of extraordinary drama.
And that scene just always makes me think that your father is the last person you want to be trapped anywhere with, and yet in that scene they are a family. They function as a family unit.
Exactly, and I think that's what's so compelling about it, is that his character. He's not just the bad dad. I mean, he's mostly the bad dad, but he also has these really charming moments, and these moments of where he shows kind of a redeeming side, a human quality. So
nobody is one thing. I mean, just generally as a rule, that's a good rule for humanity. But Davis, he doesn't trek in one-dimensional anythings. He really, one of the complaints that was leveled against Sunset Song is that the lead doesn't grow, but she does. She just does it so incrementally and simply through competence, that she starts as a teenage girl and she ends in her early 30s as an independent woman working a farm in Scotland. And she doesn't have a lot of choice. She just does it. And that lack of a dramatic arc, I guess, put people off of it. I was really surprised after TIFF when the reviews came out that people were kind of hard on it, especially in England. But it's his thing. He is showing you a character in their world, in their environment, and how that environment shapes that character. And it doesn't always happen in a moment. There isn't an epiphany. I don't think his films have a lot of epiphanies. They don't have a lot of time for it.
No, I think that's very true. I think he's a real humanist in that he doesn't, I think he's very compassionate with his characters, even the ones who are, have serious problems. And I think that he doesn't expect change in that way that, Hollywood films have sort of conditioned us to expect a huge arc throughout the course of a movie, right? So I think he is really a humanist in that way, where he's sort of he kind of loves his characters and sort of invites you to, I don't know, just to see the different sides of them and position your own narrative in relation to theirs, maybe, or something.
Yeah.
I think the sequence. I think there's 3 consecutive shots in the film that I think are my 3 favorite consecutive shots in the history of cinema.
Okay.
And it starts with the shot of the umbrellas. They're outside the cinema, and rain is pouring down on these umbrellas, and there's a red brick wall right behind, and the camera's just on these umbrellas, and we're just watching the rain, splash off. And not doing anything for the longest time, and then slowly starts to boom up and reveals these 2 movie posters. One of the films that's featured is Love Is a Many Splendid Thing, and the other is Guys and Dolls, and the camera sort of continues to drift up as the music's playing, and we reveal the lamps at the top of the theater, and we see the rain sort of coming through them, and then we move inside the cinema, and the camera is craning over the audience that is lit with this absurdly bright backlight, like Robert Richardson style, where there's just this glow and everyone's smoking cigarettes, and just these puffs of smoke are drifting up, and the camera just moves very languidly, purposefully, sort of diagonally across the crowd to reveal the 2 young women who are watching the film and just sobbing, caught up in the melodrama, and then it holds, and we just watch them sort of weeping these sort of tears of joy and pleasure at this sort of cinematic experience, and there's like they're low lit as well as having this very strong backlight. It's very theatrical, and then that cuts to a shot looking straight down at sort of like a skylight, like a glass atrium, seen from above, and we have no idea what we're looking at because we can't contextualize it, and we look at that for maybe, I don't know, like 10 seconds or something before the bodies of 2 men slowly fall into frame and descend and crash through this glass, and just the contrast of sort of the horror of the moment, which is also aestheticized. It's made very beautiful, and it's sort of put in conversation with these 2 previous shots, which are very much sort of celebrating a certain reverence for the history of cinema and for old Hollywood,
kind of rapture of the movie palace.
Yeah, totally. And then we're confronted with this moment of tragedy, and when I look back on just that little sequence there, because that's very close to the end of the film, and at that point, the brother, who was one of the young men who fell off a scaffolding at a work site. It's just I found that so impactful and so beautiful. I mean, and the movements are so simple as well, like the camera movements. I mean, they're so striking and so choreographed, but also not complicated. I mean, there's the one that's the boom up, there's the one that's sort of the diagonal movement across the audience, and then the final image is just a lock off, but it's from this really striking angle, looking straight down. I don't know, that just always really stuck with me.
You're right. It's simple storytelling.
Yeah.
There's nothing magisterial about it except for the length of time that he holds for.
Yeah.
And it's the most primal editorial connection, right? You just cut to something and it influences your it influences the experience that you're having of the thing that you just saw, because it's colored instantly by this progression. And he just uses that so gracefully, just with such command.
Yeah, I think gracefully is the perfect word for it. It's so simple. Not a single line of dialogue is needed. I think it's probably all in. It might be like a 4-minute sequence or something. It's just 3 shots. It's really remarkable.
I just love the idea of going through this thing shot by shot and just unpacking even the physical space, the relationships between people, where he chooses to stand them, where he chooses to position the camera, and how that plays out the power dynamics in the family. You know, people are always kind of shying away from Postlethwaite when they're in the room with him because he is capable of exploding. That violence is always there, and you feel it. You feel the tension. That's what I mean when I say he uses room tone and air. You can hear the heaters. You can feel the breathing. You can feel how close people are. And when I went to England for the first time, I really wasn't prepared for how little space there is in homes of a certain age. I mean, it's a small country, and everything houses ceilings. I grew up in Canada. I have no experience with small places. Even our small apartments and small townhouses here are pretty big compared to a British row house that would have been built before the war. It's a close country. It's a close living space, and Davis, more than almost anyone else, really uses that as a narrative tool to show you how little freedom there is, how little privacy, how little space there is. And Ben Wheatley did it in Down Terrace just by using this tiny little house as a set for the entire movie. He shot it in a real house, and they just couldn't fake it. And with Davis, I have a feeling most of it is sound stages, most of it is constructed, but it still feels uncomfortably close, realistically claustrophobic in a way that maybe no one else was doing at the time.
Yeah. It is kind of amazing that he managed to pull off these sort of elegant dolly shots in these tiny spaces. Yeah, I don't know.
I just assumed they could move a wall here and there.
Maybe, yeah. I don't know.
But then you get to the movie palace, and it is a palace. The theaters are just these huge, encompassing, enveloping spaces where you can lose yourself with other people and experience whatever you're experiencing, but there's a sense of safety there. And I completely, that's him. Like that's his relationship, his escape. In Enough Time in the City, his documentary, he talks about, his personal documentary, he talks about hating the Beatles and just not liking popular music. And you can completely see this man retreating as a child into whatever movie was playing.
Right.
And losing himself completely. I think that's the rapture for him, was the escape.
You can so clearly see sort of his disdain for like the the male, like the football culture and like the pub culture, in the way that he sort of depicts some of the men, like all of the men, basically in the film, with the exception of the son, who seems to have a kind of tenderness about him. But yeah, it totally makes sense that he was probably a cinephile and was just spending all of his time watching these Douglas Sirk films or
in the cinema of Terence Davies, pubs are for either singing or being miserable in.
Yeah.
But nobody has a good time. They're just there out of obligation.
Right.
It's what you do. It's what one does.
It's what one does, yeah. I think it's so interesting. I remember reading something or hearing an interview with him where he talks about, because he'll also have these scenes where a man will walk up to the bar in the pub, like we're mid-scene and there's been a bunch of singing happening already or something like this, and the guy will go up to the bar and he'll say, I'll have one of this, two of this, 2 of these. These are all drinks I've never heard of, and just sort of that attention to detail. And they were all drinks very much of the period. It's, he's not just saying like a pint of Guinness and a pint of ale or whatever it is.
Yeah, a Sharp's Doom Bar, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
that's a real beer.
I don't remember what the specifics were, but I loved the attention to detail, and that they were like, and that he would make a whole scene out of that. Like, I mean, it's not a long scene, but this when just sort of list off this sort of reverence for this attention to detail.
I believe it's just something he saw. Something he saw, something he witnessed and included. Like so much of his films, it's built on detail, and as you say, specificity is everything. It's a time and a place that doesn't exist anymore, and he's doing everything he can to show it to us, to recreate it.
When did you first see the film?
Did I see it at TIFF or did I see it when it opened? It might have been a few months later. It might have been theatrically when it opened, because there were a lot of blind spots that I caught up to later.
Okay.
Or maybe I'm confusing it with The Craze. I saw The Craze at TIFF, I think.
Sorry, I'm just throwing that one at you.
Philip Ridley's film. Yeah, it would have been when it opened, definitely, or right around then.
Right.
And
as a young journalist, what was
yeah,
your
not a
impression
press
of it at the
screening. I
time?
definitely saw it with the public audience.
Yeah.
I loved it. I didn't understand how it was working on me, but
Right.
I really loved it. I mean, this was the year of Die Hard, for God's sake. Movies were big and exploded. I was only just beginning to understand who Ken Loach and Mike Leigh were. I knew about British realism. I think I had seen Kes that year at
Okay.
York at film school. The year, like that's, no, hang on, I'm getting the years wrong. No, that's right. I was in film school from 87 to 88. 1 year left. Hated it at
Okay.
York. But I think I saw Kes in film school, so that would have been the fall of 87 or the spring of 88. So I was aware of the movement, and I had like a beginner's understanding of it all. And I had seen High Hopes that year. That might have been at TIFF or just after. It was right around there. It was all part of a continuum. I'm just trying to imagine where it was. I know I saw it in a theater with people.
With people,
Yeah.
right? I guess at the time, Mike Leigh would have been like a big thing, eh?
He was coming up already.
was
Yeah,
coming
Life
up
is Sweet
already.
really broke him
Yeah.
here, but we
Yeah.
were getting his films. Canada was getting his films theatrically before the U.S. was, so it was a factor.
Right.
He was around,
Right.
and Loach had been working for 20 years
Right.
at least.
But I guess it's interesting maybe to think about where this film fits into, like, I mean, Terence Davies is obviously a queer filmmaker. It's not, there is no queer content actually
It's
in
not
the film.
It's not specifically
no
a queer
there's-
story.
No, but I mean, I think that he would identify as being part of, in some way.
I think the perspective of it.
Yeah, the new queer cinema that was sort of happening at that time, in terms of, like, I guess Gus Van Sant was coming up in
Yeah.
the States, and like it's not just because we've spoken a little bit about how it sort of fits into the British context, but I'm just wondering if you have some thoughts on. But I don't know. I don't know if he would have been visible as a queer filmmaker at that time.
I don't think it registered here.
No.
I think in the UK he was probably as out as you would get in the
Right.
80s,
Right.
or part of it in that world. But
Because if you think about, like, Gus Van Sant, for example, like Malinoche which had come out maybe a couple
86, I think.
86
yeah.
is a very gay film. It's
Sure.
like, it's very, very clear that he's trying to tell queer narratives and doing that with a lot of confidence. Whereas I guess with this film, yeah, definitely not so much. But I'm trying to think about, I don't know, because I wasn't around. I mean, I was around as a very small child, but I'd be
Yeah.
interested to know sort of what that scene was like in England in terms of, like,
German was definitely carrying the flag.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of representation in the films and in conversation, he was definitely in front of it. Davis, I don't know. I don't think so. I think his films are so rooted in a time when you simply didn't discuss
sexuality
or just the possibility of homosexuality. I mean, it was criminal in the period in the film when the film takes place.
Yeah.
I don't think. I'm trying to remember, when did Kate and Jones make Scandal? Because they sort of dabbled in a sexual representation then. But no, I 89 maybe. But I don't think. I think that while English cinema was very much aware of it, the nature of the nature of the story that he's telling means that it's going to be repressed anyway. That they're not going to talk about any kind of sexual. I mean, it's not a sexual film.
No.
And maybe that was a conscious choice, or maybe that's how he remembers things, that he was afraid to act on anything or even to explore things when he was that age.
Right.
And so he's simply representing the period as a sexless, kind of emotionally static, cold place.
Right. Which is, yeah.
Which would certainly be how I can imagine him remembering it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so almost as a political choice, not to want to sort of, misrepresent the period, I guess.
Yeah. And maybe if you go back and look at a couple of scenes, you'll see people glancing at each other in a specific way. That's that kind of Sirkian understatement, overstatement, where it's there, but if it's not, if there's no musical sting to accompany it, you might not even notice.
Right.
But I don't think so. I don't remember anything specifically.
Like no innuendo at all.
Yeah.
No, not a lot of sexual subtext. It's just like, they're out at the pub and then it cuts to a wedding. And all of a sudden, two characters that you saw maybe having a conversation at the bar. Now they're getting married. And that's just kind of, how it works. And there's not a lot of, at least in the film, there's not a lot of magic or mystery to sort of how that happens. It's just the thing that happens.
Yeah, and based on the logic of the film, marriage makes you miserable. Like, no one is happy in a wedded union in his movies.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Is that true? Does anyone have a good partner, like a happy relationship in the film? Not really.
No, I don't think so.
No.
I'm thinking beyond that one. Most of his movies have just very unhappy marriages.
Right.
Deep Blue Sea, Sunset Song. Marriage is presented as the thing that will save you and then just traps you. Quiet Passion, Dickinson never gets married, but her sister sort of is the life force who is slowed. Well, no, that's not a good example, but it doesn't save his central characters. House of Mirth doesn't have marriage as an out.
You're married.
I am.
Do you find that to be unrelatable in a way, like just this sort of disdain for the institution, or like?
No, I don't think so.
How does that ring for you?
I'm enough of an idealist that I would like to say I'm happily married. I'm pretty sure I am.
Yeah.
We've been together. Kate and I have been together 15 years this year. By the time this drops, we will have celebrated our 13th wedding anniversary by going to someone else's wedding, which is sort of great because apparently when you go to a wedding on your anniversary, you get to take a present. I've decided this.
Oh, yeah.
I think this is a great tradition, and I'm going to start it.
That.
No, I didn't. I just made it up. It's a good one.
Okay.
You say, with this gift you honor us, and you take it, and you can leave. I've decided. No, I think marriage is an institution. I don't know that. Not having grown up in England, I don't have that relationship to the institution. It's just a thing here that and generationally too, right? I mean, we got married 50 years after the events of this movie. I don't relate to anything about the concept of marriage as it's depicted in Davis's world.
Right.
It's I think that's how he sees it. Mm-hmm. I think he can't, consciously or unconsciously, he can't help himself from depicting marriage as a trap, or as not a prison exactly, but it's a thing that people fall into. And then, of course, in England in the 50s, one did not divorce.
I guess, yeah. He saw it not work out so nicely for his mama.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You watch people suffer, and so that forms your opinion. I mean, my parents were together for 15 years. They divorced when I was 10, and I still believe in the idea. Mm-hmm. I don't know. You know what? It's funny. I don't know if I believe in the institution, but I certainly believe in the commitment.
The idea of that kind of respect and sort of...
Yeah, I just, we got married because we didn't want to not be married. Mm-hmm. I don't know that there's anything... It's a declaration, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you're just telling people, this is the person I'm with. She's with me, I'm with her, and we're together against whatever comes. And there isn't a sense of that in Davis's movies.
No.
Like, marriage is not a union in that way. It's a practical solution to things, but it doesn't make... I think we're stronger together, and I don't know that any of his couples are.
No, I think that the couples that are really strong in the film are not romantic couples. They're the friendships.
That's right.
Between the young women, and it's almost like the marriages, the coupling up that does happen in a romantic sense, is the stark, firm enemy of those friendships, and sort of tears them apart.
Yeah.
Kind of consistently. I mean, which I think is, which again, I mean, maybe is just reflecting a certain experience that he had, but it is pretty clear because, yeah, as you said,
it happens over and over and over. Yeah.
As you said, it's not like these couples that form and marry end up actually triumphing or doing anything together, right?
Yeah.
Like it's totally functional in whatever, in the patriarchal capitalist context that these people have grown up in, and that's what you do, and that's a functioning institution. But you're right in terms of what it means for the emotional lives of the characters. It's an absolute shock. Like, it's a severance of and that, I think, is...
Well, it's the end of their happiness.
Yeah.
And they go to work as a couple. They go to work with building the marriage and building a home. But it's not... Yeah, it's not entered into out of joy or pleasure or passion.
Yeah.
Bummer.
Yeah, total bummer.
It really is. Which is a shame because, like... part of it is the thing, too, after the older couple, the mother and father, having been married since... presumably post-World War I, when England was actively trying to rebuild its population because so many men had just died in the war. So you have this imperative to procreate, to marry and make more kids, make more Englishmen. Right. And then the Second War comes along and just, again, more of the same. The Blitz is much more indiscriminate. It kills everybody. Bombs don't discriminate. There are no soldiers. They're just bombing civilians being bombed.
Yeah.
And so all of these traumas are supposed to make you more patriotic somehow and rally and move forward. But that meant people jumping into relationships that would end badly because they weren't set up for the long run. They were all impulsive decisions. Sunset Song does something similar. The lead gets married because her boyfriend's going to war. Mm-hmm. So they get married, and then he goes to war, and then he comes back, and he's not the person he was, and that's their reality. That's the relationship.
Right. This is obviously a thing that he's working on all the time. I guess, right?
God, 30 years now.
Yeah. Still plumbing it for new inspiration.
Yeah. Well, and the Emily Dickinson story is the story of a woman who recedes from the world while perfecting her art, but she refuses the opportunities of happiness, or at least of engagement, to just stay by herself in her space. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's where he's at now. Kind of hope not. He's pretty sociable.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What was your experience like? Under what circumstances did you...
He's very chatty. He's lovely. He will talk about anything. He will address and explore, and he has this magnificent voice. We had a couple of phone interviews, and we finally met in person when he came through with Agnes Dane for Sunset Song.
Okay.
2 festivals ago.
He does the voiceover in Of Time in the City,
yes, right? Yes, that is very much him.
Which is just, I remember.
This beautiful, plummy, vaguely, still pretty northerny kind of... He sounds like my in-laws. He sounds like my wife's family.
Okay.
They're from Stockport, which is just across the way from Liverpool. They're not too far.
Okay.
They're closer to Manchester.
Something familiar about that for you.
Very much so, yeah. That's why I relax whenever I talk to Danny Boyle. He sounds like my brother-in-law, Pete. Like, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Mannerisms, delivery, everything. It's a pleasure. And Davies, I admire his work so much, and his vision, which is still remains singular. No one else has found a way to do that. There's no Canadian equivalent. There's no American equivalent. Maybe Austria has produced a couple, just because of the static nature of his world, where everything is very cloistered. Haneke comes close once or twice, but he's a sadist. He's much more cruel to his characters, and Davis is much more compassionate towards them. I think even the ones who are awful people aren't fully awful. They're not awful all the time. Yeah, and what you were saying about Postlethwaite.
That's totally, and I think that's what I find so relatable, and maybe what I try and work on a little bit in my own stuff is kind of creating those kinds of complexities that sort of destabilize the viewer and sort of ask you to have kind of compassion and be okay with feeling like a kind of equivocal about whether you like them, whether you trust them, whether you want to go for a drink with this person or never see them again. And, and I feel like that's definitely how I feel about some of the characters in Davies' work, but at the same time, that kind of tenderness of vision that's very, very different from what we get in a Haneke film or something like that. Where, talk about a grim vision of the world. I mean, that's a whole other thing, right?
Yeah. I would love to find out what he thinks of Davies' vision, just if they're compatible in any way, because they are weirdly similar. Now that I think about it, Amour is, probably his warmest film, and it ends with everyone dead, but it flickers with hope, and it's all about compassion. It's all about wanting to help the person that you love.
Mm-hmm.
Which is sort of, I think, how Davis feels about his characters. He's rooting for them to get better and get out, but they don't have a chance.
Yeah, but at the same time, Davis has this kind of whimsy that Haneke probably has like no patience for.
Yeah,
right?
that's true. He would be displeased.
Yeah.
Well, so this does your mentioning of how you approach your own work does lead us to the key question of the final question of the podcast, which is, you know, like, what, if anything, of Distant Voices Still Lives have you borrowed or stolen or incorporated into your own work? I don't really see a direct connection in Brazen Age, but if there's something I missed.
No, I don't think there's nothing explicit. A lot of little things, I think. The willingness to use the camera in a kind of confrontational way, like some of the staging, you know, some of the sort of Brechtian elements, for sure. And then, yeah, some of the sort of, definitely some of the formal elements, the reverence for music, maybe not so specifically in O Brazen Age, but I think that definitely in some of my other films, and just that willingness to do things that are very out of sync with what's happening in the contemporary cinema that you're attempting to be part of, you know, or contribute to those conversations that are happening around you, whether that's for Davies as a British filmmaker or as a queer filmmaker, or, you know, for me making films in English Canadian cinema and wanting to see that kind of growing tradition continue to get more interesting. And yet, at the same time, as wanting to be part of those conversations, what I see in Davies' work that I really admire is just his consistent ability to do things that are like very unpopular or out of sync with the aesthetic choices or the kind of the rhythms that we were seeing in, whether that's Mike Leigh or Derek Jarman. This is something totally different, right?
Yeah.
So that's something that definitely struck me when I first saw the film, and that I carry with me today, is that willingness to, or just I try and feed off of that bravery and that sort of tenacity and commitment to want to shake up the language of the cinema that's happening at the time. Yeah, these are some of the things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there something coming along in your next? Is your next project an extension? Where do you go now?
That's a good question. I'm working on a project that's probably slightly more experimental, even in structure, than O Brazen Age. That would be sort of a cross between. It would be mostly fiction, but also some documentary elements about a group of people making. It would be sort of in conversation with like Fellini's Roma a little bit, in a way where it's a little bit of a metafiction about making a documentary about. I'm living in rural Alberta right now, and it would be sort of about the weird. I don't know if you know a lot about small town Alberta, but there's all of these really weird regional museums and roadside attractions there, and so I sort of had this interesting idea that I could make a film that would be sort of about that, and also about the process of documenting that, or the process of sort of exploring the points of intersection, or the contrasting points between like the public narratives that are being told by these sites, by these small museums or institutions or whatever it is, and kind of what's happening in the personal lives of people who are doing the chronicling, who are doing this sort of documentary project that's sort of a portrait of some of the oddities, I guess, of rural Alberta. And so the shape that it's going to take, I'm not exactly sure yet, but it's going to be some sort of a cross between like a weird ethnography of small town Alberta and a piece that's sort of about kind of the points of intersection between public and private narratives in a dramatic sense, and probably sort of vignette based and sort of shot all around the province.
Okay.
So, yeah, that was not a very concise explanation, but
that's okay. How close are you in production? Or
No, not even. No, I'm still working on the ideas behind it. I think I haven't written a script. I mean, I don't even really want to write a script, unfortunately, in order to get to get funding in this country, you often still need that for a quote unquote dramatic film.
You got to show people what you have to have concrete something.
Yeah, which is not how I'm happiest working. I mean, with a lot of the short films that I've made, I think that they've been good, or the things that I like about them are the sort of roughly hewn qualities that come from starting a project without knowing where it's going to go. Mm-hmm. And, it's very much, shoot a little bit, write a little bit, edit, and then go back and do more of that. But when you're working with a longer form project, not a lot of people are going to be willing to give me any money, I don't think, or any confidence to do something like that, that might cost, more than a limited Arts Council budget. So, right, yeah. So I'm still trying to figure that out and what that would look like. But if it means going ahead with the project on a smaller scale and doing kind of a less commercial thing, I mean, I think that the film could still have commercial appeal in an art cinema, like in a film festival kind of context. But basically what I'm trying to say is I'm not super. I don't think that the next move for me is to do something more traditional narrative or bigger budget, or to pursue the goals that one is supposed to pursue if you are part of a certain conversation about filmmaking. Mm-hmm. I just don't know if that's a fit for me. I think that other filmmakers would be better at making those types of movies, and I think that going back to doing a more of a process-based thing that's unwieldy and amorphous, and I think that feels like more of a fit, and that's definitely what I see and what I really admire about Davies' work is that he made all these super strange choices, and and I don't think the film was very successful at the time. At least not based on how good it is. I don't. Yeah,
not financially. Anyway.
Not financially.
It was very well regarded.
It was very well regarded, but it's sort of continued to appreciate culturally. I think in that people have sort of seen that he was working on something kind of special, and if I could ever aspire to anything like that kind of body of work, then that would be something that I have in high regard and definitely working towards. So.
Yeah, well, that's a good goal.
Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, it's not bad. Yeah, no, I think it's, I think it's great. I really admire his commitment to personal vision, even if it's sort of out of step with what's happening at the time in filmmaking. And yeah, if I can do something similar, then I'd be very proud to.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I can see that. Do the work, and people will figure it out eventually.
Yeah, exactly. Life is long, right?
My thanks to Sandy Carson, whose first feature, Oh, Brazen Age, is available on iTunes right now in most of the world. If you're in Canada, you should also be able to find it for rental in the Canada Screens section of nfb.ca. And you can find a number of Sandy's short films, including Numbers and Friends and We Refuse to Be Cold, at vimeo.com/northcountrycinema. Sandy isn't on Twitter himself, but his production company, North Country Cinema, is at NC Cinema, all one word. And while Distant Voices Still Lives is really hard to find outside the UK right now, the BFI released an excellent special edition DVD a little while back that's well worth importing. I'm just holding out hope that Criterion is working on a North American edition to go with their excellent existing disc of The Long Day Closes. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you want to leave a review on iTunes, that would be very kind of you. Don't stiff upper lip it. Let yourself feel. Thanks for listening.
I'm afraid you're just too darn loud.